We're in the middle of a heat wave here in Austin with temperatures running 10 degrees above average, well into the triple digits with no relief in sight. But for a year-round gardener, there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm planting cover crops for raised beds, harvesting onions, and adding to my compost pile. So I'm bringing you a Texas garden vlog where I share my approach to garden composting, soil preparation ahead of vegetable planting, and many more tips along the way. What's up everyone, it's Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. Now today on the agenda is going to be clearing out this bed here. I've got to plant my sweet potato slips. I've been sprouting those on my front porch, looking pretty good. And then over here I've got my red onions, which I was waiting for them to get more uniform soft necks before I harvested them, but I feel like with this next week's temperatures, triple digits for 7 days straight, I'm just gonna go ahead and pull those onions and get them curing. Alright, so I had some crimson clover growing here over the winter as a cover crop, and even though it died, I just left it in place. When you want to have healthy living soil, you've got to protect it. You can't just leave soil exposed and bare. When it's exposed to the elements in that way, you're going to get some microbes that aren't able to survive, and it will also result in rapid depletion of moisture. So a cover crop or a mulch, a thick layer of mulch would work too. And I've got some volunteer larkspur, which I didn't mind at all. Feed those pollinators, attract beneficial insects, create some beauty in the garden. That's what I'm all about. I'm gonna clear all this out. I'm gonna chop it up and compost it, and then I'll do a little bit of bed preparation ahead of dropping in my sweet potato slips. Okay, I wanna show you my compost pile. I utilized existing materials that I had, a few zip ties, and the fencing on the back of my property. It's in a mostly shaded area, which is going to be good. This is probably about 5 feet by 4 feet total, so a pretty good size. Initially, I built this with a lot of leaves that I collected in the fall that fell from my pecan tree. I raked those up into a pile and went over them with my mower with a bagger attached, chopped them up, and essentially I corralled them. Using some hardware cloth, I created this, and it was probably about 3/4 of the way full. This is something that's easy to put up and take down, and I can store those materials. I like to have them adjacent to my compost pile so that as I begin to integrate material that is fresh from the garden, I can layer it in with the brown material or the leaves. I have added the material that I just chopped up from that bed. Did the best I could to chop it up for 2 reasons. Number one, that will help it to break down faster, and in connection with that point is the microbes and the insects that have a role in breaking down this material will have better access to the organic matter through the openings created by chopping it up. And it really does make a difference. If you put things in here in big pieces, it's just going to take forever. Now, I will get in and periodically turn this. I'll fluff it. I'll stick in my digging fork, open it up, get some air in there. But in the meantime, I'll come back here daily or at least a couple times a week and poke holes in it with this garden stake. That's going to create some air chimneys. You don't want your compost to go anaerobic. You're taking advantage of a closed loop system you have in your garden if you can create this type of compost pile. As I was clearing out this bed here where I'm going to plant my sweet potato slips, I really tried not to disturb the soil. I didn't pull up the roots aggressively. I cut most of these things at the ground level, and that's because just like the action of the cover crops, living mulch, or mulch in general, protecting the soil life. Whenever you turn the soil, dig the soil, till it, uproot things, you're disturbing all that life. That's why it looks the way it is. I'm not worried about all this riffraff that's here. This is organic matter. These plants grew from nutrients in the soil. Those nutrients are staying here, and the rest are in the compost pile to be used in the future. But I am going to add a little bit of compost and some fertilizer, probably something like a 464. That middle number corresponds to phosphorus. That's what is the primary nutrient I'm adding here. It's got a good amount of nitrogen and potassium as well, so it's fairly balanced. That phosphorus number is good for fruits, roots, and flowers. I've got a more comprehensive video on fertilizing. If you want to check that out, I'll drop a link in the description. But what what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to remove my drip irrigation lines. I designed this so that I could do that. I have some jute staples that I will pull out. That's what holds the line in place, but essentially I just have these snap fittings that I come in with my hose, turn it on and run it. And whenever I need to do maintenance or add some things, I can get it out of the way. It's a lot more convenient than working around it. Plus, I don't have to worry about damaging it, which I'm likely to do because that's how I roll sometimes. Whoops. All right, so the application instructions say that you should add 1 cup of the fertilizer per 10 cubic feet. Now, 32 cubic feet, that's 3 cups. But I don't really have a lot of this fertilizer, so I think I'm only gonna add maybe 2 cups. A little bit is gonna help regardless. All right, so I got my fertilizer put in place, and I like to use my garden weasel to integrate that fertilizer, move it around a little bit. Again, I'm not turning, I'm not tilling, I'm really barely putting anything into this action. It's just enough to move the fertilizer, distribute it a little bit so that I can better offer it to the soil microbes as they do their work. This is a pile that I constructed probably in the last 18 months, and I got to a certain point, I stopped adding to it. I did turn it a little bit, and then I just let it settle, let it cool down. The material in the middle of this pile is what has received the most action in terms of, breaking down those materials. When you harvest compost, you're utilizing a sieve to separate the organic material that needs to break down further from the finished compost that you can utilize in your garden. This was yard scraps, garden cuttings, kitchen scraps. It didn't look like that when I put it in there. Here's the sifter I used. This is a 2-in-1 sifter. It's got 2 grades. The other one I think is a 1/2 inch. This one is a 1/4 inch. That's probably 3 cubic feet. Well, that worked out in terms of the amount of compost. Now it needs a deep watering, a good soaking that will help integrate both the fertilizer and the compost. Now I use my sturdy garden rake in order to smooth out the compost as I added it in. I don't really turn it in. It's going to naturally be integrated into the soil. The microbes will migrate those elements. I'm not essentially the most efficient composter. I'm pretty lazy actually, but I have a lot of organic materials here behind me, probably 5 or 6 piles, several yards of material, and I do utilize it. I just don't work it very frequently. I don't use a lot of it. You got to start somewhere. If you want to buy compost in a bag from a garden center, that can get you off and running. That can be really helpful as organic material. However, think about it in terms of the soil food web. If you want to create a sustainable garden that consists of indigenous microbes and beneficial bacteria and things along those lines, you need to make your own compost. These elements here are not essentially coming from California or wherever they're coming from. They're coming from my backyard. They're the ones that have the best chance of surviving here in Central Texas. It can be a lot of work. You can go at your own pace, but that's just a little taste of my composting system. I have put my irrigation lines back in place. I set it up about 6 inches off the edge of the bed, and I'm going to be planting my sweet potatoes in rows, 1 slip every 8 inches in rows 12 inches apart, which is exactly how my lines are spaced. You like sweet potatoes? I know you do. All right, so I had a little issue with the sweet potato slips. I planted them in the evening. I watered them in really well. The next morning, I put a nice layer of pine straw. However, this was the start of triple-digit temperatures, and unfortunately, a lot of them got singed, got burned. What I did to try to prevent any further loss or damage was I put up this shade structure. Very simple, using some green garden stakes and some of the sea-bite clips, which I've been experimenting with and I really like for making structures like this. Yeah, and using the 40% shade cloth and some clips, I've got 100% coverage of this raised bed. I'm going to keep these watered over the course of 2 weeks. I'm going to keep the shade cloth on them. I will need to remove that in order to water them, but that's the sweet potatoes. The Southern Belle red onions, I didn't think were quite ready. I think it's just time to pull them. They're going to get stressed from the heat. I'm ready to eat some of these too. I've still got some bunching onions, these green onions here. I'll be continuing to harvest and enjoy those. And unlike the bed where I'm going to be planting the sweet potatoes, it's not necessary for me to remove the irrigation lines, because growing a cover crop, I don't really need to amend the soil. When I prepared the soil for growing my onions, I added some compost and fertilizer, just like I did for the bed with the sweet potatoes, only about 6 months ago. That's how I go about it. That's why I'm not removing the lines, not amending the soil. So I just got out some of these big red ripper southern peas. These are field peas, cow peas, whatever you want to call them. These are some of the most hardcore plants you can grow for food as cover crops. Here in Central Texas, they have done phenomenal for me. They'll vine easily 6 feet. They get a little bit wild, but I love that. The raised bed will completely disappear. You won't see the edges. You will have a reduction in weeds, and they will produce all summer up until the frost, round after round. They set high on the plant, so they're easy to see. They tend to attract wildlife, native bees, beneficial insects, dragonflies, hummingbirds, you name it. And I can't wait to get them in the ground. Let's do it. I love working with the pine needles, or what I call pine straw mulch. It's really easy to work with. You can see I just roll it back with my spring rake. It comes right off, because I'll likely reuse it on this exact bed once I get my seeds germinated and they get a second set of leaves. This gives me a clear view of the soil and the seeds as they germinate. You know, if I see some roly-polies or other ground-dwelling insects in excess, I can use some diatomaceous earth, poof that on the base of those plants, those seedlings. Sometimes I do that. Now I'll show you over here. This is a variety of southern pea that I sowed probably 3 weeks ago, at least 3 weeks ago. And there were about 5 that didn't germinate, or even when I reseeded, something came and chomped the top of it. So that one's not going to grow. If I have all this mulch here, that harbors these ground-dwelling insects. But when I'm direct seeding, it's important that I get a little bit of a buffer, and so that's why I like to pull back the mulch. I can see more clearly. Gotta take care of that breakfast business. Shoo-wee! Hey, I'm planting. Planting feels weird. When you grow a lot of food, you gotta cook some food. Okay, I'm trying to do something, all right? You're good. Thank you, I appreciate it. Clearly need to practice that. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel. Like this video and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.